today's tutorial, we are going to be making the Bella Boxy Bag. This is my newest pattern. I will give you guys all the measurements for this in the pattern. You can find that at bythebaybagco.com. And we're going to get started. This is a super easy make. The thing that's going to take you the longest is quilting your fabric. If you buy pre-quilted fabric, this goes by in a snap. So let's get started. Okay, now I've taken my two fat quarters and I have squared up the edges because sometimes fat quarters, they're not cut exactly straight. So I always like to square up the edges. So these are roughly 18 inches wide by 22 inches tall. Now I do have a directional print on this one. I'm mainly doing this as a tutorial for my daughter. So I'm making one for that she'll like to have. But so I am going to cut this down the middle and then do a very, very, very narrow hem or seam on it, like an 1/8 of an inch seam on it, just so that all the little beetle juices will be facing the direction. So if you have a directional print, you want it to be going with the 18-inch edge so that it'll be facing up. And then if it's directional, you'll want to put a seam down the middle so that these guys are facing the correct way too, because the 18 inches are going to wrap around and be where your zipper are. So I'm going to go do that real quick, and then I'm going to use this 505 temporary adhesive for fabric. This is like a spray based. So I'm going to spray it to my foam and sandwich the foam in between the outside fabric and the lining fabric. Okay, now that I have this sewn to where all the little beetle juices will be going in the correct direction, I'm going to spray base this down to my foam. Now you can use quilt batting if you want to, or fleece, whatever you want to use to quilt these two. I like the foam because it gives it lots of structure, and it's kind of fun to sew on. You could also, instead of using the spray based, if you don't have any of this spray based, you can also just use safety pins and safety pin it all the way through all 3 layers all over. And then you're going to quilt this in any pattern that you want. I'm just going to basically do big squares on it. So I'll quilt lines going one way and then I'll quilt them going the other way just to make squares on it. But you quilt it however you want with whatever kind of batting or foam or fleece or whatever you want to use on the inside. And then when you're done quilting it, you do need to either zigzag or serge the 2 18-inch ends if you're not doing the contrasting binding around the edges. That comes in a future step. You can either bind these 2 edges and then just sew them directly onto a zipper, or the method I'm going to do is I'm going to serge these 2 edges so that I have finished edges on the ends, and then I'm going to add my zipper. So whichever method you prefer. Okay, now that I have this quilted, I have finished both the 18-inch edges with my serger. You can zigzag them, or you can do the binding method that I talk about in my pattern. Now I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to install it. Now this is just zipper tape, and I've cut 20 inches so that it's longer than my 18-inch piece. I have this linked in my bio of all my social media. It's in my Amazon list of favorite sewing supplies. Is it the highest quality zipper? No, not really. They have plastic zipper pulls, but will it work for this project? Yes, it will. I wish it came with metal zipper pulls, and some other listings on there might, but the one I have linked comes with plastic. And then I'm also going to use a zipper jig to install this onto the zipper when I'm ready. I sell these in my shop, so if you look at the link and click the shop my patterns, or I also have it linked as shop zipper jigs, I think. My husband 3D prints these for me, and they're great because they act as a third hand putting the zipper pull on the zippers. Or you can use a pre-made zipper. If you have a pre-made zipper, just make sure it's 20 inches or longer so that you have a little wiggle room to play with. So what I'm going to do with this method, where I have not used the binding on the edge, I'm going to put the right side of my zipper, which is where the teeth are, to the right side of my fabric. And I'm just going to center this up, and then I'm going to clip it into place so that I can sew it on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I'm just going to go along here and clip this down. And then once we have it sewn on with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, then I'm going to turn it and top stitch it down. And what that does is that prevents any of the fabric from like getting bound up in your zipper teeth. So I'm going to sew this on, and then I'm going to repeat it on the other end. So I'll just bring up the other end, match it up, make sure the edges are aligned so that it's nice and straight, and I'll sew that on, and then I'll pull it apart and top stitch all of it. Now you can use a zipper foot for this if you have one. I like using these little 1/8 inch wide zipper feet. So it's got an 1/8 of an inch on either side of the needle, and that just helps get pretty close to the zipper teeth. So I don't have to use a zipper foot when I install zippers. So we've got the first side on, so I'm going to pull the second side up to match it up so that the edges are even. I need to clip these little serger strings. They're always in my way. And then I'm going to clip this across the zipper and sew it the exact same way. Zipper by the yard is great because then you have any size zipper that you need for any project. And the package that I have linked on Amazon has like, I think 20 different colors. So I have a color for almost any project that I have. Grab this serger string right there. All right, now I'm going to sew this one, just like I sewed this one, at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that we have our zipper on, and this is something you can do with zipper tape. If you have a pre-made zipper, you're going to want to unzip it as far as you can. That's why you want a zipper that's longer than this project so that you'll be able to open it up pretty wide. But zipper tape's cool because you can pull it all the way apart, and now you're working on a flat piece. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold this back edge under, and I'm going to top stitch an 1/8 of an inch away from this folded edge. You could take this to your iron and you could press it. Just be sure you don't melt the nylon teeth of your zipper. That's another thing that's important, is don't use metal zippers because, I mean, they have their purpose on certain things, but a nylon plastic zipper like this, your needle will go through those teeth and you can sew over it. So you're not as likely to break a needle that way. But they do melt if you get an iron too close to them. So I'm just going to fold this over and go slow and feel my way across, and I'm going to top stitch an 1/8 of an inch away from that folded edge. And I always like to explain why I'm doing certain things so that you kind of learn why things are done that way rather than just telling you to do it. But though, like I said before, the reason why you top stitch when you install a zipper is to keep this fabric from rolling over and getting stuck in your zipper teeth when you're trying to zip something up. You know, sometimes your fabric gets stuck in there and then your zipper's stuck and it's a big pain. So that will help prevent that. If you would like to, you could go back and do another row of stitching an 1/8 of an inch away from that seam allowance on that side just to keep it down. But I think I'm just going to go with this. I'm going to do the other side and then we'll install our zipper pull. Okay, now we're going to install the pull for our zipper. If you have a pre-made zipper, you can skip this step. But using my zipper jig, I'm going to put my zipper foot, not my zipper foot, my zipper pull with the flat side facing me and the pointy-ish side facing up. And then you're going to take the wrong side of your zipper and you're going to kind of line it up and see which side is just a hair longer. So you'll know which teeth go in first. So this one, the right side, looks like the teeth are just a tiny bit longer. So I'm going to install my right side in first, and then my left side. And then I'm going to pull down, and it's just going to pull that zipper pull right on. So see, these are great because they act like as a third hand. So like I said, I had these listed in my shop. So we've installed our zipper pull, and I'm just going to pull it to where it's almost closed. Be careful and don't pull it all the way off, because it will come all the way off of the other end if you are not using a pre-made zipper. And now we're going to find the center of our bag. So we're going to pull this zipper up and fold our bag in half this way. And we're going to find this little crease right here, and that's going to be the center. Now you can mark that any way you want. I'm just going to stick a pin in it since I'm using the foam. Some people will clip this little corner off and make a tiny little triangle cutout right there, or you can use a marking pin, but be sure that you're pulling your zipper flat up here at the top so that you find the true center of the bottom. And I'm just going to mark that with a pin. And that just happens to line up with one of my stitching lines right there. And on mine, it will line up where the seam is, where I had to seam the two directional pieces together so that my little Beetlejuices go in the correct direction. So I'm going to hold this zipper over here just where it's flat on the top, and then find that crease, and I'm going to stick a pin in there. And then we're going to take this and we're going to lay this flat, and we're going to line up the middle of, let me get in camera, the middle of our zipper with the where we marked the center. And then we're just going to add some clips along here. And then we're going to add our tabs in. So let me clip this, and then I'll show you the tabs. Let me show you this side where the zipper is open. I mean, you can zip this almost all the way up. You want to make sure though that your zipper pull is like inside your fabric. Don't leave it dangling out here when you do this next step. Otherwise you won't be able to open your zipper. But I like to just line mine up to where they're touching right there at that center mark, right like that. And then we're just going to clip it. Okay, for our little tabs, you're going to have a 6-inch piece of either, this is nylon webbing and it's 1 inch wide. It really doesn't matter what you use for your tabs. You could take some of your fabric and you could make a 1 inch wide tab. This gets a little thick to sew, so make sure that you can sew through a zipper and 2 layers of webbing. If you're going to use webbing, you could use ribbon, you can use twill tape. Trying to think of what else you'd use. Little pieces of vinyl that you've cut that can have like raw edges that don't need to be finished. Whatever you want to use for your tabs. You just need 2 3-inch pieces, and since this is nylon webbing, I'm going to take a lighter and I'm going to melt the edges because it's polyester nylon, so it melts. That's also how you can check to see if fabric is synthetic or a natural fiber, because natural fibers will catch on fire and synthetic fibers will melt. And what that does is that prevents the edge from like fraying out. So you just need 2 little 3-inch pieces that are 1 inch or 3/4 inch wide, however wide you want your little tabs. And you're going to fold them in half. And then you're going to line these up right on that center mark with the fold facing inside your bag. And you can even let it hang over just a little bit on the edge here, just to make sure that you do catch it in there. So I'm going to take that, and I think I'm going to use my pin to keep that in place. You can use clips, you can use pins, you could baste it if you wanted to. But we're just going to line that up with the center of our zipper. And I'm going to add some more clips so nothing shifts. These little clips are great. I have these linked in my little Amazon storefront also. When you order from the Amazon storefront, it doesn't cost you any more than it would if you just got on Amazon and searched it. It just kind of helps support the channel a little bit. I get a little tiny commission from stuff on there when you purchase through one of my links, or anybody's link for that matter. Not me, but they do. So I'm going to fold the other one in half. I'm going to line it up on that center mark right there. Leave a little tiny bit of an overhang. And then I'm going to pin that in place. And then I'm going to clip my zipper centered on that. Now our next step is going to be to measure in from the edge. You're going to do boxed corners on this. And so the next step is going to be to sew this side seam, but then we're going to go through and we're going to box the corners, which means we're going to cut through that stitching. So to prevent your stitching from pulling apart, I like to measure in 2 1/4. Let me grab some pins here so I can mark this. I like to measure in 2 1/4 because that's the size box corner that we're going to do. So I'll measure in 2 1/4 and I'm just going to mark that with a little pin. You can mark it with chalk pencil or friction marker, whatever floats your boat. Because I'm going to back stitch right there to make sure that when I go and I cut my corners out that there'll be back stitching right here so that the rest of my seam won't pull apart whenever we box the corners. Some people will just sew this across, cut their corners, and then go back stitch right there. I'm trying to like cut out a step. So we're going to sew this seam at a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and we're going to back stitch where these pins are right here. And then on some of my bags, I will back stitch over the zipper. Also, if it's super big and bulky with whatever I'm using for the tabs, sometimes I'll back stitch over that just to add a little bit of strength. Okay, so let's sew this at a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And I'm going to back stitch right where this pin is. That way when I cut through it, it's not going to come apart. Now, if you have a domestic machine, mine is a semi-industrial machine, and it was designed for quilting, so I'm able to move my presser foot up and down, and I'm able to move my feed dogs up and down a little bit to adjust for the thickness. If you're using a domestic machine that cannot do that, then my suggestion would be to invest in a walking foot. Walking feet are great. I'm seeing if I can find mine real quick to show you. It's somewhere in this drawer. Okay, well, I can't find my walking foot right now. Walking feet are great for doing things that are really thick on an industrial machine, because what it does is it helps the presser foot walks while the feed dogs walk. So it pushes everything that's really thick through evenly. If you don't have access to a walking foot, I got this little set off of the TikTok shop, which it's sold out and I can't link it anymore, but they do have stuff like this on Amazon too. You could do a roller foot, and that will kind of do the same thing to where it's going to push the thick fabric through evenly. So if you're having a problem with your machine pushing really thick things that you're quilting through, definitely invest in a walking foot. They're worth their weight in gold. So I'm going to sew right over this zipper. Like I said, remember before, nylon zippers you can stitch through. And I'm even going to back stitch over my zipper to give it a little bit of strength. Because remember, we're also sewing through that tab that's in there too. So then we're going to come up on our next pin, and that's going to be our next mark to back stitch at. And then all the way down to the end. So your side seam will look something like this. Now you can trim off. I am a rebel. I sew over pins all the time. Don't come for me. I've been doing it for 40 years. Never had a problem. Trim off your zipper, and then you can also take your nylon zippers and you can melt the end of them. That will also help with your zippers not fraying out of the seam. So I'll just lightly go over that, and that'll make that not fray at all. So we're going to repeat that on the other side. Now we're ready to box our corners. So we are going to measure in 2 1/4 inches from the fold and 2 1/4 inches from the seam. You don't want to measure from this edge because you've got a 1/4 inch here, so then your box corner won't be even. So you're going to measure from this stitching line where your seam is. Now I have this little box corner template from Carolina Stitches, Carolina Little Stitches. Got it at a sewing convention. She's awesome. She has lots of neat little templates like this. So I can line this up on the 2 1/4 here and then line my seam up on the 2 1/4, and I can draw my little box like this. Or if you don't have one of those, you can use a regular ruler and mark it, or you can use one of these quilting rulers and just do the same thing. This one's kind of hard to see because it's super glittery. This one is from moremeknow.com. moremeknow.com. Her name is Lauren Moremeknow, and not spelled like that, and so her business is More Me Know. And I'm actually teaching for Lauren in about 2 weeks in Belleville, Illinois. So it's the weekend of April 24th through the 27th of 2025. So if you're in the area, you may want to hit them up and see if you can come to one of our classes. I'm teaching my drawstring bag class there. I'm also teaching my drawstring bag class and my Sunny Sunday tote in Vegas in July at the Socation by Socation Sin City from So Besties. So if you're interested in taking a class in person from me, just let me know. I can send you all the information for those. So if you're using a quilting ruler, you're just going to line up your seam allowance on the 2 1/4 mark here and your fold on a 2 1/4 mark here, and then you're going to draw your corners like that. I'm going to use my handy dandy little corner template right here. I would love to invest in a, what are these, laser engraver, Glowforge, whatever you use to cut this acrylic stuff. I never even peeled the backing off of this one because it's easy to read this way. And you can use this one with a rotary cutter because it does have the little slots where you can cut like that. But I like doing this with my scissors to make sure that I get it just right. So just remember to line up with the stitching line right here and not the edge of your fabric. That way your boxes are the right size going both directions. So I'm going to draw these on all 4 corners, and then we're going to box our corners. Okay, so we're going to cut out these little squares, and this is why you back stitched right here at the 2 1/4 mark. So when you cut through this seam won't pull open. So we're going to cut all these little squares off. You can just toss those. You're not going to need those. All right, now that we have all of our little squares cut off, we're going to bind this edge so that we have all finished edges on the inside of our bag. I have some binding here that I got from, I cannot remember where. Where did I get this from? I can't remember where I got this from. Wonderground Fabrics, that's where I got this from. This one is, I think, 1.5 inch wide. Yes, this one's 1.5 inch wide binding. This is made out of waterproof canvas, so it doesn't fray along the edges. So I use this in a lot of my like purse bag making. But you can use bias tape, you could use ribbon, you could make your own bias tape out of fabric. I'm including a tutorial on that with this pattern. I mean, you could serge these if you wanted to. They wouldn't look as pretty. I like binding them. You could use contrasting binding so it looks really cool on the inside. However you want to do it, but we're going to finish these edges. So you're going to clip this on even with your raw edge here. And then we're going to sew this right over that seam that we did to the first time. So I'm just going to flip this over and sew this right over that same seam that we made before. And then I'm going to trim the seam allowance just a little bit because it's getting kind of puffy right here. So I'm just going to trim a little bit of this where the foam is out of the way a little bit, because that can get a little bit cumbersome to wrap up in that binding. Okay, now that I trimmed a little bit of that foam out of the way, you're just going to take this and fold it back on itself and wrap it around. If you have a double fold bias tape, it will wrap back up under itself, but this has a finished edge, so you don't really have to do that. So I'm just going to take this and I'm going to clip it in place. And this section, it does not matter if you're going to have raw edges right here. So don't worry about folding it under, because we're going to take care of that with our when we box the corners. And now I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to stitch in the ditch, making sure that I catch that edge on the back. Okay, so flip it over, make sure we catch the edge. I'm not even worried about the contrasting thread because this is going to be on the inside of your bag and nobody's really going to flip this inside out and check all your stitches, so that doesn't really matter. So we're going to repeat this on the other end. All right, now it is time to box our corners. So you're going to take your corner and you're going to pull it apart diagonally, kind of like a fish mouth. And then you're going to just pull it to where it lines up. It'll magically line up. I like to fold my seam allowance away from the zipper. And I'm going to clip this, and then we're just going to sew this at the 1/4 inch seam allowance. So now you have a boxed corner. You can trim this up. We're going to bind this the exact same way that we did the binding on this side, except the ends, you're going to fold in the ends on your binding so that you have finished. So I've sewn my binding on the same way that I did the first step before. We're going to wrap it around, and I'm going to trim off the end here a little bit, and I'm going to fold it over and then fold it down. So that way I have a finished corner on these corners, because I mean, they will kind of show, but nobody's really going to look inside there and make sure you finished your corners. But just to give it a little finished edge. So just fold this in, fold this down. If you have double fold bias tape, remember it will fold back around that way. And then clip it, and then you're going to top stitch this side, or you can stitch it from this side, stitch in the ditch, whichever one you prefer. You're going to repeat that on all 4 corners. Here's a little hint for you. Sew your binding the same time you sew your side seam. So that'll take a whole step out. So instead of sewing the side seam first and then sewing the binding on along that same seam allowance, just sew your binding on while you're sewing your side seam. if you can handle that, and that will take out a whole step. So see, I sewed that side seam and the the binding on at the same time. So now I'm just ready to fold my binding around my seam. So that's just a little pro tip. All right, now we got all 4 corners bound. So it's nice and finished on the inside. We're going to open our zipper and we're going to turn it right side out and see how it looks. Be sure to push your corners all the way out so you have nice sharp corners. And that binding will also help keep this a little more stable and give it a little bit of structure to your corners. Give it a zip, and there you go. This is why I like the foam so much, because it gives it so much structure and it just stands up on its own. Quilting it with binding will do pretty much the same thing. It'll just be a little more snuggly and squishy. But you've got your little tabs on the end to hold so that you can zip and unzip. You got a fantastic lining on the inside that's nice and tight. There's nothing I hate more than like sloppy linings on the insides of bags. So I love to quilt them. I love to French seam the corners of bags together so that the lining will be nice and tight. But you could take your iron and unzip this and iron it. Give it a good press all the way through. That's why I like those little mini irons. Those work great for stuff like this. But this is such a great size for a toiletry bag. So, and I think the Beetlejuice print is so cute. Okay, and we're done. We've got this great little contrast zipper with our little zipper pull, our little tabs on the side. We've got our boxed corners, and we've got our nice tight quilted lining on the inside. We did the binding. This was easy peasy. The longest step is going to be quilting it, really. If you bought pre-quilted fabric, this would go by in a flash. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, a like, subscribe, comment, all the different things. Be sure to share the ones you make using my pattern on all social media by tagging us at bythebaybagco.com or at bythebaybagco on social media. My website is bythebaybagco.com, where you can find all of my patterns. I have all of my patterns priced either free or at $5 because I want everybody to be able to afford to sew. Prices are going sky high right now. Fabric is hard to get because it's overpriced, even in the Joann's liquidation. So I like to keep my stuff inexpensive because I want everybody to have a chance to be able to make one of these awesome little Bella Boxy bags.